All right, welcome to our final lesson of the semester, I believe. We will have other opportunities for like learn and practice, Canvas writing workshops, but this is our last like PowerPoint lesson video. So that's really great to be heading downhill to the end of the semester. Welcome in. Today we're going to learn about some techniques for organizing and arranging the flow of your argument to be more academic, more persuasive. As always, while you listen, while you watch, take notes that include not only information from the slides, but also ideas of your own that come to mind. So one of the great things about a recorded lesson is that you can pause at any time that you need a little bit more time to write, to think, etc. Of course, the downside is that you can't raise your hand and get immediate clarification or question and answer, but we do have the Canvas replies below where you can ask your questions then, and I will come back and answer them for you. So as we get started, just pull open whatever resources you need to take notes. If you are one of our learning leaders, remember to share your 3 main takeaways from the concept of organizing your academic argument. Share 2 added insights. So this is something from your own point of view where you're adding to the lesson, such as thinking about your own approach to writing arguments, things that you've learned in other classes, resources that you find helpful when you are writing. So just adding to the lesson, so really making a two-way street between it's not just what the professor says, it's also what some of your classmates say. And then one deep thinking question, sort of like asking us to think a little bit more deeply about what writing an argument is all about, what persuasive writing is all about, things like that. And anything goes, truly. Share your notes in the Google Doc, and if you need any help, just send me a message and I will help you get pointed in the right direction. All right, so everyone should be ready with their note-taking supplies, ready to open your minds to active listening, taking notes, thinking about how this applies to your own work. So let's jump in. All right, today's lesson is about scholarly arguments, participating in the discourse for your topic. During this presentation, we are going to look at kind of like what is scholarly writing and where does my voice fit into this. Recalling that rhetorical situation, so that relationship between the purpose, the audience, your content and style. And then techniques for a persuasive flow. So some common ingredients that we expect to see in all academic arguments. And then I think we'll look at 4 formal techniques and then a reminder that this is your argument and you are welcome to remix the conversation in a way that feels authentic to you. So first of all, what is scholarly writing? Some characteristics of scholarly writing, as we already know, is that we want to join an academic conversation. We want to enter into a research-based discussion of the topic, not just my opinion and my reasons why, but knowing that you have paid attention to the conversation and that you're ready to join. We want to give fair and comprehensive attention to the existing views, whether they support our stance or challenge our stance. And we want to enter into a they say, I say contextual relationship. We'll look at this more on the next slide, but kind of saying like, okay, I've heard what they're saying and this is how I enter. So it's like this relationship of context. We want to, in academic scholarly writing, we want to activate our academic language. We want to apply words and phrases from our critical thinking lessons, our readings, learning and practicing exercises. So we really want to put that into practice. And then also, since we're engaging in the context, we want to apply similar words and phrases from the research that you've done. So as you review your sources, really keep an eye on effective phrases, statements, and things that the community is using when they discuss the topic. That will help give you a more seamless context. A huge feature of scholarly writing is that clear organization. So making sure that there is an intentional focus where we are discussing one aspect of the argument at a time. And for each aspect of the argument, we fully develop claims, evidence, and analysis. Making sure that those chunks are arranged into a meaningful flow, moving purposefully from one topic to the next to build enhanced clarity, enhanced intensity and urgency, enhanced relevance and context. So really being intentional with what you start first, next, then, that type of thing. And then, as always, using those signal phrases, overt and detailed transitions to help guide the reader through your thought process. So helping the reader move with you comfortably as you flow from one statement to the next. And we have a huge bank of signal phrases and transition words from our previous learning materials. And you can also look these up online if you feel like that's helpful for you. So let's look at the they say, I say structural relationship to see sort of where your voice fits into the argument. So They Say, I Say is actually a common textbook that is assigned for English C1000, also known as English 122. And it helps us learn how to provide context for sharing our viewpoints. So remember, elevating our opinions to the status of an argument by first summarizing what you've discovered in the research, and then introducing your own conclusions, viewpoints, and responses. So linking, adding your voice to this existing body of authority. That's what we do in academics, and I'm sure you may have noticed. And when you reread through your sources, getting ready to prepare your argument, you may notice these techniques in a different light, where you might see the sources doing these techniques. So I've prepared a few sentence frames, and granted, these don't apply directly to each person's topic, but it can help us see how we can add your voice to the academic conversation. So if we're introducing the context of our argument, we might say something like introducing the types of discourse community, introducing the debate, and your viewpoint in one complex academic sentence. So for example, environmental researchers, journalists, social media creators, and everyday consumers are debating the cultural shift from combustion engines to electric vehicles. But despite many benefits, I remain wary of the overall dangers that have not been fully considered. So this is how you can get kind of squish together the context, the debate, and your response in a single sentence. If you want to speak specifically on problems, you might say something like, psychologists have long warned that excessive social media use is harmful to our mental health, and I have experienced these damaging effects firsthand. A statement like that prepares you to bring in evidence from research in psychology, as well as evidence from your own personal experience in order to discuss and analyze the larger context of mental health. So this one sentence really puts you in the position to embark on a sophisticated, complex discussion. What's going on here? Okay, or another example, introducing the solution. So along with human rights activists and social justice writers, I strongly urge all readers to actively resist hate-based ideologies by demanding rights and protections for all members of the trans community. A statement like this prepares you to introduce evidence from human rights and social justice. It prepares you to analyze the underlying norms, ideals, and values, specifically hate-based ideologies, and like rights and protections for the specific context of gender equality. So using these types of complex sentences help you fit your voice into the larger conversation. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys take these kinds of sentence frames and make them your own, and use them to speak about the discourse communities, the topics, the context areas, and the analysis that you are adding to the research. The next thing we want to talk about is reinforcing this idea that writing is a discovery process. So I'm not expecting anybody to sit down today and write those complex sentences and follow them up with immaculate paragraphs. This is like a long-term exercise. The purpose of research-based writing is to present the cohesive argument and persuade the audience toward your viewpoint. But the process of shaping and creating that argument and that viewpoint is a discovery process where you will learn to express yourself through outlining, drafting, seeing what your peers are writing, revising, and editing along the way. So you're not expected to come out of the gate with these well-crafted sentences and paragraphs and analysis commentary. Also remembering from previous learning the philosophy of like last things first. It's through the drafting process that we really discover what the discourse community was, what their opinions were, what the analysis is. And it's only until we do all of that work that we are able to put that lovely bow of our claim or our topic sentence together. So just to rest assured. All right, what's next? The rhetorical situation. So the purpose of scholarly writing, looking at our expectations about the audience, looking at the kinds of content and style we want to bring into our paper. So the purpose of scholarly writing, looking at the goals of academic argument. Number one, educate the reader about the outcomes from your sustained exploration, evaluation, and analysis from your numerous diverse sources. So you've done all this good, solid research. Now you want to educate your reader about all the research that you've done. Number two, remember, you want to add a new perspective to the conversation. It's not enough just to say, oh, I agree with what's being said about these solutions. Those are good. Start with that evaluation, but then push it further. Leverage your perspective as an educated adult invested in the future of this topic. Show how your stance fits in and why it's important. So if you agree with solutions that are being proposed, tell us what that would look like in your community. Tell us what consequences and impacts you expect to bring about when those solutions are adopted, etc. Number 3, persuade the audience to accept your stance toward the issue. Just telling them what you think is not persuasive. You need to convince them, leveraging your rhetorical appeals and making sure to avoid rhetorical fallacies. So making sure you're using your evidence well and not committing fallacies of ethos. Making sure that you are connecting with your audience's emotions, values, and beliefs without going overboard and manipulating them. Or misleading them, and making sure that when you are making arguments, analysis, commentary, that your ideas are logical, that you're not jumping to conclusions or skipping steps in the thinking process. And then finally, the purpose of academic argument is to really encourage critical thinking in yourself and in the reader. So show the audience how you developed your views in response to those hidden or unspoken norms, values, and expectations that are embedded within the discussion. Show your audience where you are using critical thinking to reinforce helpful ideas and resist harmful ideas. Where you are using critical thinking to propose transformations for the future, and really empower your reader to follow your lead and do the same thing. So if you've been questioning, analyzing, and predicting things about this topic, now you're teaching your reader what you've discovered and encouraging them to question, evaluate, analyze, predict, etc. So those are our goals. What does that look like for project 3 in this class? We want to have that solution-oriented thesis. So what solution, transformation, or change are you advocating for? How are you adding to the discussion? How does that solution fit within the larger conversation? And why is this important for specific context areas? In this upcoming project, we really want to join the existing conversation, not just saying, here's what I think, here's why I'm right, but saying, this is what I've found through research, and here's how I connect. So summarizing, evaluating, and responding to research about the problems, solutions, and impacts surrounding your topic. And we always want to be analyzing the context. So defining what the topic means, define it, categorize it, help us really focus as readers, help us really understand what it is that we're discussing. Help us see how you connect with the problems and the impacts. Help us as readers think about our own connection to the problems and how they impact us, impact the world that we live in. Evaluate the solutions that are already out there. Where do you see successful solutions being proposed or enacted? Where do you see attempted solutions that you would make changes? Where do you see solutions that are just like theories that you want to see put into action? Imagine how those solutions will create real change. So remember, critical thinking requires a little element of imaginative thinking. It requires us to connect with kind of like all senses from the body. It requires us to connect with our intuition, our hopes, our wishes and goals. So critical thinking can help us imagine, if we enact these solutions, how is this going to change the society for the better? And keep your eye consistently on real-world impacts and context lenses at each phase of the discussion. That's how we're going to add something new to this conversation. That's how we are going to encourage the reader to engage with real-world changes in their own attitudes, beliefs, and actions. Speaking of the audience, let's take a little bit of time to think about our expectations about the audience. So, like, who are we writing for? We want to be addressing real audiences from the world beyond the classroom. So, imagine what kind of audience needs to hear your analysis of the problem, solutions, and impacts from your topic. So, this might be young people who are following in your footsteps. You might think about it as your younger self, the younger generation. This could include also like parents, teachers, and supporters of that younger generation. Maybe this is a wide-ranging topic and there's a general public who is being misled or manipulated into having harmful viewpoints or harmful habits, and you're speaking to those people. Maybe you're speaking specifically to leaders or policymakers who are failing to support the needs and goals of invested community members. Community members themselves. Perhaps you are trying to empower them to create the changes that their community needs. Really like stir up the crowd and inspire them to take direct actions. Assume that your audience is as involved in your topic as you are. So whatever connection you have to the topic, assume that you're speaking to people who have a similar connection. Speak to that audience as a fellow member of a shared community. So using us and we kind of language. And share the insightful critiques, proposals, and analysis commentary that you developed through those past 2 months of research that you've done. So you remember each source that you encountered, you critiqued it, you analyzed it, and now you're putting that together. So share that insight with the audience so that they become as educated as you are on the issue. In Project 3 for this class, this looks like developing a voice that speaks from the first person point of view. So I or we, owning your position in relationship to the topic, in relationship with the community. Do consider if there is an us versus them dynamic that's going on here. And usually we want to avoid us versus them thinking, but for problematic issues, realistically, there is a difference between us, who we are speaking with, and them, who we need to approach and respond to or resist or encourage. So really consider how that dynamic might help in your argument. And think about how you may address the audience. Are you addressing them as you? Like you need to do this? Or are you addressing them as we? Like we, us, we need to do this? So really think about where your audience is in relation to you. Including rhetorical questions can be a really helpful technique for transitioning to new topics, introducing new thoughts. Just always remember that if you're going to ask a rhetorical question, you do need to follow that up with a clear analytic response. A rhetorical question is not analysis, right? You need to add analysis to that. And the voice for Project 3 is going to include a good amount of that appeal to pathos. So really humanizing your argument by connecting with the feelings, emotions, and real experiences of the people involved. Don't oversimplify your audience. Don't diminish or demean your audience, even if you are against them. Even if your audience is the problem, they are still human beings too. So really connecting with that on a human-to-human level. When we link our argument out to abstract ideals or beliefs that are embedded in the discussion, things like freedom, justice, equality, health, wellness, rights, technology, the future, progress, whatever kind of big abstract ideas are connected to your topic, that is another way that you're appealing to pathos. Pathos isn't just about feelings and emotions, it's also about those values, ideals, ethics that are underlying the topic. And then, of course, also stirring up feelings when you can without going overboard. But if we need to be angry about something, tell us, where we need to direct our anger. If we need to feel hope and inspiration towards something, channel us towards feeling that hope and inspiration. It's a really effective source of argumentation and persuasion. And avoid fallacies. I almost forgot that one. But yeah, as we are making all of these appeals, also making sure that we're not taking it too far. And we will have peer response on this to get an outside perspective to see, am I going too far? Am I not going far enough? Am I touching all the right chords? That kind of thing. So finally in this segment, decisions about content and style. So what we're going to include and how we're going to include it. How should I present my argument? We have format options beyond the MLA format essay. So think about the sources from research that made the best impression on you. And what format were those in? What genre was that? If you go back to your list from your annotated bibliography and you think, this was my favorite source, this source was most inspiring, this source made the best impression on me, I would encourage you to try and mimic that format or that genre. And this is also something that we can talk about in office hours or in the discussion boards on Canvas. You can send me the link to the thing that you want to go with, and we can talk about it together, like workshopping how to approach that kind of genre. But no matter what format you choose, you are going to need to present your argument with clear organization. So each paragraph or chunk of the argument needs to have a clear purpose. Each paragraph or chunk of the argument needs to have a full development of claim evidence analysis, and you need to be using transition words and signal phrases to demonstrate your thought process. So no matter how you're presenting it, that's what you'll present. No matter how you're presenting your argument, you will include evidence. So you're going to need to refer. The most sophisticated thing we can do with our evidence is synthesize it, referring to connections across several sources at once. That's why in the examples at the start of this lesson, I was trying to mention multiple voices. So that's something that we really want to try to do. Part of our evidence that we can include is summarizing the main idea of the article. So really going right back to your annotated bibliography where you summarized the argument already and just summarizing the argument, giving a citation tag, paraphrase. So if there was a big paragraph that you were really impacted by, but you can't copy paste that whole paragraph into your own argument, you can paraphrase that into your own words. Another way that we use paraphrase too is if somebody said something very complicated, so maybe they had one sentence, but it was super complicated, we might paraphrase that to make it more digestible to our audience. And sometimes when that happens, we have this one sentence and then we take 3 sentences to paraphrase it. So paraphrasing works in a few different ways, and we should practice that, shouldn't we? It's not on my lesson plans, but maybe I'll add it. Let me add a note. Please hold. Okay. So summarizing and paraphrasing. The most common form of evidence is direct quotes, and these can be single words, short phrases, or whole sentences. And remember, we're going to need the citation tags, and we will practice that for sure. We want to avoid quotes that when you bring it into your document that you're writing, it shouldn't take up more than 4 lines. And that's not just for MLA format. Like if you're using a slide presentation, you don't want it to really be more than 4 lines. So we want to avoid that whenever possible. It's best to paraphrase and excerpt just the most powerful phrases from that longer quote. You also might bring in images, graphs, or charts if those are relevant. So we will learn how to include all kinds of evidence next week. So practical tips for organizing your ideas to influence your audience. This is where we're going to look at what ingredients should our essay argument include and how might we arrange them, one after the other. So to begin with, common ingredients that you kind of expect to see in all arguments, a clear thesis statement with in this case, the solution, the context, and the impact. And remember, when we introduced the assignment prompt, the thesis is going to make our entire argument cohesive. When we make claims, we're going to direct them back to the solution. When we introduce evidence, we're going to direct them back to that context. When we analyze, we're going to be directing that back to the impact. So the thesis really holds the whole argument together. Often we see a literature review, and this is just like an academic phrase that means a summary of our research. So a lot of us, when we were looking at academic articles for Project 2, we may have noticed that before we go into the study or the argument or the research itself, we have a little summary, like a little history report of what the topic is all about so far. So for us, we have sort of prepped this in the synthesis introduction to the annotated bibliography. That gives us, it's longer. When we go into our final project, we'll condense it with more focus on our specific argument. But giving a literature review gives the reader a little bit of context about the situation. Helps us see, the historical background and the recent developments, helps us see a snapshot of the discourse communities that are involved in this discussion, helps us clarify and distinguish the meaning of key terms. So if we're going to be using key phrases in the argument, we need to understand up front what that really means. It helps us see all the impacts, so like the major context lenses that are relevant here, and then just emphasizing and focusing on the context areas that are relevant to your focused specific argument. So that literature review sort of helps us bring the audience up to speed with everything that's going on. Every argument is going to have paragraphs or chunks that include claims, evidence, reasoning, analysis that help develop that thesis statement. Remember, leading with your voice, leading with your views in the claims, and then bringing in support for research. All arguments are going to address opposing views or alternate viewpoints, whether that means you will reject views that you oppose. So this is where we really get into the problems. Oftentimes, we can say, this is the source of the problem. This is what's wrong. This is what's causing these issues. And here's why I reject this viewpoint, these values, these ideals. This is what's harming us in regards to this topic. For some viewpoints, you might be all acknowledging some of the merits. So this could be somebody's perspective about solving the problem. You might be acknowledging some of the merits, saying like, okay, they're on the right track, but we can't accept this other part of their issue. This is where they go wrong. Or we're on the right track, but here are the faults. So there's like this mixed response. And then another way to speak about alternate views is making space for somebody else's solution to exist at the same time as your solution, kind of equally, and saying like that's a really good option for some people, and I encourage those of you who like that to go with that. But for my audience, for my community, people who are like me, we're gonna go about this solution, and this is how we're gonna do it. So there's multiple ways to address the opposing viewpoint or alternate viewpoints. It doesn't always have to be versus. It could just be a different view. So some common argument formulas that pretty much everybody who's taking critical thinking and writing is going to be learning about in America. The Aristotelian formula that emphasizes really an attitude of winning the argument, like it's like a competitive sport. the Toulmin formula that has more of an emphasis on defending the argument, sort of like brushing off questions or counterpoints. The Rogerian formula, which has an emphasis on kind of like discussion and reaching a common ground with the audience rather than like winning the argument as if it's a competition. And then we have a little bit of some indigenous wisdom coming from the Cree people in North America, what is now Canada. And this is more of an emphasis on connecting with the personal, local, and spiritual responsibility toward the topic. So sort of taking stewardship of the topic. So we'll look at all four of these arguments, and then we'll have a reminder. Don't look at the screen yet. We'll have a reminder that within these different formulas, you still have the creative freedom to remix however you like. So getting into the Aristotelian formula, coming from a million years ago, the emphasis is really on winning the argument, to present your solution as like the best, the most superior stance, the only one that anybody should consider. And you really want to refute counter examples by disproving them, undermining their value, just disparaging them more or less. Aristotle was the one who came up with the rhetorical appeals. So really, those strategies are a hardcore, overt connection to ethos, pathos, and logos. I'm pretty sure Aristotle is not the one who came up with rhetorical fallacies, so just a caution not to overdo it, not to get too fervent, that you are crossing the line into manipulating or misleading your audience. The basic ingredients are the ingredients that we are taught from grade 4 of how to compose an essay. The hook that entices the audience, the context that shows why your viewpoint is important to a larger world, and then your stance. So this is your thesis. Then you support your argument with credible, relevant, powerful evidence. You refute and address the weakness of counter arguments, and then in the conclusion you restate your thesis. So the Aristotelian essay is our argument form is what we are all usually most familiar with. Next, I want to look at the Toulmin formula. Admittedly, not my favorite. This one is coming at us from about the 1950s in the UK. I think of it as like logos, ethos, and pathos, just in a slightly different font, where logos tends to emphasize cause and effect reasoning as like the primary reasoning style. Ethos tends to lean more heavily on statistical, mathematical, like fact-based type of data rather than the opinions and viewpoints of experts, so to speak. The pathos is often based on the principles or the ethics underlying the argument more so than emotions and feelings. And the overall emphasis is on trying to create an argument whose reasoning is so clear and direct that it's beyond refute. Here are some ways that we see the Toulmin formula play out, often stating your argument as a matter of fact. So instead of saying like, this is my stance toward the issue, like, no, this is like the be all end all. So arguing basically that your viewpoint should be accepted as a fact, or arguing that previously accepted facts are no longer valid. One example that I'm giving of this is a claim, so a paragraph that begins by saying video games cause violent behavior. And you can see how that's pretty bold to just come right out and say that, state it as a fact like that. Also, the Toulmin formula includes evaluation claims, often ranking, so what's good, better, best, what's bad, worse, worst. That type of thing. So an example of that, we might see a claim for a paragraph that says like Halo is the most influential violent video game. So, it's just, again, it's saying it kind of like as a fact, and it's emphasizing the superlatives here. Policy proposals are common in Toulmin arguments. We often see arguments where you're really trying to get the audience to adopt a behavior, make a choice. So arguing why actions, policies, or procedures should be taken or shouldn't be taken. Excuse me. I'm perpetually recovering from my cold. So an example could be a paragraph that begins with the topic sentence saying, video game content should be censored. So just some examples to put it into a more visual understanding. The basic ingredients are, I feel, overly complicated and technical. The ingredients include a claim, what is called grounds or data, warrants or generalized principles, qualifiers, limitations, backing or additional data, and rebuttal. And maybe this is like the part that just rubs me the wrong way, is the language that is used to outline the argument structure. Let's take a look at those ingredients. I'm borrowing this from an example. I've adapted it from an example that's linked here in the slides. So you might see a claim where it says, my grandfather should use a hearing aid. And the grounds or the data for this claim is something that says like over 70% of people above the age of 65 have difficulty hearing, and hearing aids are known to improve hearing ability. Warrants, or also known as generalized principle, might be something like improved hearing will enhance my grandfather's daily quality of life and help keep him safe. A limitation to this argument. Hearing aids help most people improve their hearing, apart from those with severe damage to their ear. Additional data. So furthermore, hearing aids are easily accessible over the counter. And then that final rebuttal, if problems should arise, technical support is always available. So the argument takes somewhat of a defensive stance because it's very careful to say, so like the qualifiers and limitations, it's very careful to say, my grandfather should use a hearing aid. It's known to keep older people like safe, have an enhanced quality of life. Of course, I know that hearing aids aren't gonna miraculously heal somebody who has severe damage or impairment, so I'm not wrong. Of course, I know that hearing aids are a technical issue and the elderly seem to struggle with that. So my argument isn't invalid. They can always get tech support. So it's kind of like each time I express my opinion, I'm like defending it a little bit as well. I'm imagining what someone might say to counter me, and I'm preemptively defending against counterattack. So that's why I feel like the Toulmin argument is a little bit like defensive. Also, it's just it's more formulaic. It's not my style, but this lesson is for everybody. So maybe some people are inspired by this style. The Rogerian formula is coming at us from the 1970s in the US. It helps to maybe know the context that the previous guy, Toulmin, I believe was like an analytic philosopher, similar to Aristotle. Roger, I don't remember his first name. It's this guy, Rogers, was I believe, like a psychologist. So totally different backgrounds. But for this argument structure, the goal is reaching a common ground. So opening the topic up for discussion, demonstrating that you understand what the other party is saying, introducing your perspective as at least equally valuable to their perspective, and not focused on winning or losing an argument, but just discussing with equal mutual respect. So you can see how that has like the flavor of a psychologist, whereas the other one has a flavor of like a mathematician. Some of the technique is based on mutual respect and understanding, beginning from a stance of understanding the existing perspective, addressing your readers with a personable and connectable, like relatable voice, and suggesting that your views can coexist with other views that are out there. The basic ingredients for this kind of argument flow are like introducing the problem first of all, giving a comprehensive overview of the problem and how it has impacted us, acknowledging the alternate views. So sort of saying like, this is what other people are suggesting. I understand those suggestions and I'm sure they have great strengths. Like you don't always have to undermine the opposing argument as long as you're including it somewhere within your own argument. So you're acknowledging the alternate views and then introducing the merits of your own viewpoint. So sort of leading with analysis first. So analysis, evidence, claim is kind of the formula for the Rogerian style. So demonstrating the value that your perspective is about to bring into this conversation and then bring that proposal forth. It's almost like you've preemptively already proven your thesis by the time you give it, if you see the difference, rather than giving your thesis and then convincing the audience that your viewpoint is valuable. In the Rogerian formula, is this what they call reverse psychology? Because they're doing it backwards? I don't know. Don't listen to me. But it's almost like you're proving your argument, and then when you state it as a thesis, your reader is like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So this is a different flow. And then finally, I want to look at an indigenous approach coming from the Cree people. This is, not specifically dated in the scholarship, but about the year 1600 or so in the territory that is now known as Canada. But this type of argument structure really emphasizes the personal and political domain of knowledge. And what that just means is that learning and research is seen as a personal journey of discovery and healing. And so for some people's topics, this argument style will hit differently. So like everybody's topic sort of lends itself to a different argument style as well. The purpose of building knowledge through this indigenous practice is seen as a political act of decolonization. So why did I do this research? Well, it was to undo a history of colonization or a history of subjection, to reclaim some sense of political autonomy. And this type of argument works well in a lot of topics that are based on oppression, specifically with race, gender, things like that, class issues, ecological issues, things like that. Also, one of the underlying assumptions of this argument structure is that sharing knowledge. So finding knowledge is an act of discovery and healing that is geared toward political freedom, political emancipation. And the purpose of this is so that through my act of research and argument, I can bring my community to a state of healing, wellness. I can reclaim something that has been lost or taken from us, things like that. So really a close connection between the personal experience of research, learning, and argumentation and the political or cultural embodiment or connection to that process. one of the key emphasis on the shape of the argument, so the kinds of claims that we make, has to do with taking accountability in response to the issues. So understanding concepts and events through the relationships and impacts upon people, communities, places, and even imaginings. So even on our thought structures and on our thought processes. So perhaps saying something along the lines of the impacts of this problem can be seen in individuals, in communities, in like the land. So this could be in architecture or environmental loss, in how things are developed, like that kind of thing, or in our imagination, so our ideals, our values, the metaphors that we use to understand or speak about something, the worries that we have of the future, things like that, is kind of saying how the problem has impacted in these different context areas. Knowledge, one of the underlying values too, is that knowledge should be formed through individual and social consensus. So that's that they say, I say relationship. Like, this is what I think because I paid attention to the discourse, I paid attention to the conversation. I'm not alone in this. I'm not standing out here by myself saying, here's my opinion and the reasons why I'm correct. I'm out here saying that I learned these views by connecting in relationship with the community, the society. Also, knowledge should be action-oriented toward decolonized values and policies. So the purpose of building and sharing knowledge is to inspire action that leads to liberation, freedom, authenticity, as opposed to colonization, domination, brainwashing, so to speak. And some of the basic ingredients are introducing yourself. So really bringing your voice and your persona into the topic and outlining, how do I connect? Like, who am I? Who's my family? Who's my community? And how do we connect to the problems that I'm about to get into? How are we working towards solutions to these problems? So really bringing yourself forward and speaking on behalf of your community, introducing your community's involvement with the topic, and exploring emotional and spiritual outcomes of intellectual viewpoints. So saying, like, here are some arguments, here are some theories, here are some critiques. But this is how those intellectual ideas and abstract arguments and academic views make us feel, make us live in our body or in our history, in connection to our connection to the world in a like spiritual way, in an emotional way, in a community-oriented way. So those are just some of the key ingredients that you would expect to see along the lines of an argument that flows through this structure. And I will provide an example of this. It's not linked in the slides. I thought I did. Did I link it? Okay. I linked an example to this format of argument into the image. So if you're on the slides, you can click the image to get to the argument. So we learned 4 basic flows, and remember, you put your own spin on the topic. You draw upon your own research to provide a fair and comprehensive coverage of the topic. Discuss the major concepts, problems, and debates, but make sure the majority of your argument focuses mainly on proposing solutions and changes. Strengthen your personal stance by joining sources that share your view, by refuting sources that undermine your stance. Include personal experience as well as research. Focus and frame the conversation around your unique points of interest, even if those are a little bit niche or marginalized within the loudest and most common arguments in your research. In other words, kind of tell the reader, okay, this is the table I'm sitting at, and this is where I'm sitting at this table. This is where I'm facing. This is where I'm looking forward to. And the way you do that really is by selecting quotes and details from your research that help your reader understand your context, your point of view. You do this also by your claims, your analysis commentary. Really take some time to recenter yourself. I encourage everybody to go back and read their project number 1. Recenter yourself on your initial views as you sort of begin to embark on your argument. And then as you go along the way, develop commentary from your authentic stance that helps you critique the dangers of views that you oppose, to celebrate the values of views that you are advocating for, and to imagine the impacts of the changes and solutions that you are proposing. So whether you take the Aristotelian, Toulmin, Rogerian, or indigenous flow as your inspiration, you'll be putting your own spin on it to make sure that you're including all the ingredients from the assignment prompt, and that you're using, persuasive techniques and rhetorical strategies within the larger context of the research that you've done. Easier said than done, but we will work on it together. After this lesson, make sure to follow up. I do encourage you to review your research proposal to sort of recall where you started at. Reflect on your annotated bibliography, and based on the research you've done, how do you feel about the purpose, audience, and style for your argument? What kind of solution-oriented thesis might you start to develop, and how do you feel about that? Do you feel prepared, or was your research really problem-focused, and you kind of feel unsupported? Trying to propose a solution, and that's something where you can connect with me and we can talk about it. How do you feel about making your own space within that discourse that you've discovered? Do you see the table? Do you see where you fit in to that table, so to speak? How do you feel about your ability to combine what you've gathered through research as well as sharing from your own personal experience? How do you feel about being able to really critique the problems? So critique and undermine the problematic views. How do you feel about advocating for solutions that you're recommending? And about imagining, like using your critical thinking along with your imaginative thinking to suggest and predict the possible impacts of, realistically, if we make these changes, what kind of future are we looking at? What kinds of things can we expect to see? So those are some thoughts to finish up on, reflect about, think about. Come into support hours on Tuesday or Wednesday this week. And let's talk about your ideas as we switch from research to argument. Okay, I think that's it from me. A long day of talking, but I will see you guys around Canvas and on campus. So take care.